Hello and good morning from Jakarta. Welcome to today's FPCI-GRIPS virtual public forum on the US elections, how a decision in America can send waves to the Asia Pacific. I'm Gemma and I will be the master of ceremony for today's event. This public forum is brought to you by Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia and National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies, GRIPS, Japan. To begin, let us invite Dr. Dino Patijalal, founder and chairman of FPCI, to deliver his opening remarks. Dr. Dino, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Gemma. And on behalf of FPCI, I want to thank everybody who is joining our very interesting discussions this morning, and also want to thank our partner GRIPS for working with us in organizing this event. And by the way, FPCI is now 10 years old. We just celebrated our 10-year anniversary, and I'm so delighted that we have worked very well over the years with GRIPS to shape public discussions on important foreign policy issues in Indo-Pacific. And today's discussion, we are going to talk about the U.S. elections in its impact in our region. And, I must tell you that I was actually quite surprised by the result because following all media predictions and polls, I thought it was going to be very tight and very close, but apparently it's the margin that Trump enjoyed was much larger than expected, and the fact that he won all the swing states was not predicted before, and the fact that he won the House and the Senate also is something not many people predicted. So I think President-elect Trump has a really huge mandate, much more so than we expected. So I think that's an important political point to note. As for us in Asia, well, we are studying and anticipating what this means. I know folks in Indonesian foreign policy is really looking at what are the possibilities and scenarios of a Trump presidency. We're looking at a number of issues. Obviously, one is what would Trump do on climate change policies. And this is a big issue for Indonesia and for the region, and U.S. leadership is definitely expected, and we'll see what Trump will do. And there's been a lot of clues of what he will do, including pulling out of the Paris climate treaty. What he will do on U.S.-China relations, what he will do on North Korea. Tariffs also a big concern, and whether or not he will continue the Indo-Pacific strategy that Trump 1.0 pursued, and what for us in the region, of course, what will he do with regard to Southeast Asia, given that Trump 1.0, there seemed to be a pullback of U.S. engagement in Southeast Asia bilaterally as well as with ASEAN. Yeah. So these are questions that people are asking, and we await the pronouncements that will be made by President-elect Trump once he gets inaugurated. But for Indonesia, President Prabowo has made an early outreach. The son-in-law of President Trump, Jared Kushner, was invited. This is by the admission of President Prabowo. Was invited to meet with President Prabowo before his inauguration as president, and they had a good meeting. And the meeting was in Jakarta. And afterwards, when President Prabowo went to visit Washington recently, he made a call that was publicized to the Indonesian nation, and the call was very warm, and there seemed to be good chemistry between the two leaders. And in Indonesia, we are also asking if the United States will continue to fund the JETP, which is one of the biggest cooperation on decarbonizing the Indonesian economy, taking out coal out of our energy mix. Some money has been allocated already, locked in, but whether or not this will continue, that's a big question for Indonesians. So a lot of questions, but I think the biggest one of all is this America First idea. Which engulfed the Trump administration in the first term. America First automatically meant that America would not lead the world. Now, would that be the case in Trump 2.0? Is there such a thing that a renewed America First would mean lesser engagement or different kind of engagement of U.S. Leadership around the world? So, with these thoughts, I will happily and eagerly listen to the discussions that we will have today, which involve speakers from Japan and from the United States, and also from Indonesia. Yeah. Thank you very much. I wish you all a good discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Dino, for the opening remarks. And now, let us welcome Ambassador Masato Watanabe, Senior Fellow of GRIPS, to deliver his opening remarks. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. On behalf of GRIPS, National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies, Tokyo, I would like to say a few words at the opening of this public forum. Firstly, I would like to thank Dr. Dino Patijaral and the leading panelists for their participation today. I congratulate FPCI for celebrating 10 years anniversary. I would like to express our high appreciation for the collaboration with FPCI and our desire to continue to cooperate with the FPCI. Please allow me to take this opportunity to briefly share my views on today's topic as seen from Tokyo. No doubt that President Trump's administration's Asia-Pacific strategy will have a major impact on the Asia-Pacific in light of the political, economic, and military power that the United States possesses. That said, until the picture becomes clearer, we as Asia-Pacific countries have no choice but to focus on what we can do on our own without being sidetracked by the various media reports. Now, once the administration is ready, it will be very, very important to have an early dialogue on strategies and policies towards the Asia-Pacific and Indo-Pacific. Now, as for Japan, I would like to make 3 points. Firstly, the Asia-Pacific and Indian Ocean region is home to 6 of the world's top 10 GDP countries, namely the United States, China, Japan, and India, as well as the countries of ASEAN. It is important for the countries in this region to develop a web of cooperation in various fields, utilizing ASEAN-led initiatives such as AOIP and minilateral cooperation to prevent conflict and turbulence in the region, which can be caused by tension. I hope that Japan will stay closer to ASEAN and support ASEAN in making such effort. Second, in terms of security, there is no regional framework in the ASEAN Pacific till now that can replace the existing so-called hub and spoke system. To ensure the peace in the region is not jeopardized, endangered, Japan must make diplomatic and defense efforts such as strengthening cooperation with allied and like-minded countries. Third, as a member of Asia, Japan has an important role to play in contributing to regional stability by providing necessary support to vulnerable countries that are left behind in growth and those that are subject to political and military cohesion. This is also important to Japan for earning the trust of the countries of the global south. Now, let me conclude my remarks by expressing my expectation that today's exchange of views amongst leading experts will be thought-provoking and meaningful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador, for your remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, the time has come for us to start the discussion. And without further ado, allow me to invite our moderator, Mr. Lutfi Ramis, researcher at the Habibi Center. Mr. Ramis, the time is yours.
Thank you, Jima. I hope my voice is audible right now. Yeah, thank you so much. Good morning from Jakarta. First of all, I would like to thank you FPCI and GRIPS for this opportunity for having me. And I want to say congratulations for FPCI for the 10th anniversary. Congratulations, Dr. Dino and team. And I'm Lutfi Ramis, and I am a researcher at the Habibi Center, and I will be moderating today's discussion. And ladies and gentlemen, before we go to our speakers, allow me to give a context, a little bit of context of today um, public discussion on the US elections, how a decision in America can send waves to the Asia Pacific. Now and then, the US presidential election has consequential implications for Asia Pacific. Structurally, the US has upward of 250 military bases in various countries in the region, such as Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines. And the placement, of course, has a strategic implication for power balancing. Hence, the US also has developed strong security partnership throughout the region, including the non-alliance country like Indonesia. Politically, the US has robust bilateral relations with every country in the region and has been an active member in ASEAN-led mechanisms. And economically, the US remains a strategic partner for trade and investment for most Asia Pacific countries. And as Dr. Dino mentioned in his opening remarks, the Trump large winning margin and clear up the swing states are indeed surprising, but well, actually, his winning is anticipated by many. However, the question is how to adapt to the Trump 2.0. And Southeast Asian countries' reaction to Trump's re-election is more relaxed yet cautious compared to the European countries. Southeast Asian countries would rather choose to focus on how to avoid tariffs and surprises. And one thing that is certain for Southeast Asia is another 4 years of President Trump could mean the absence of the US at the ASEAN-led mechanism, such as the East Asia Summit. We'll talk about that later. And in East Asia, the responses are mixed. Japanese leaders have shown a willingness to further cooperate with the US. South Korea has also stated that under a strong leadership of Donald Trump, South Korea-US alliance would shine brighter, while China, on the other hand, with a more cautious response, has shown a more careful approach in reacting to the election result, while simultaneously expecting to coexist peacefully. Now, to get better understanding on how the result of the US election will affect the Asia Pacific region, today's session will discuss the implications that the US election might have on its relation with both ASEAN and Japan, as well as its Pacific neighbors. Ladies and gentlemen, to address these developments, we are joined by Ambassador Brian McPheeters, the Senior Vice President and Regional Managing Director of US ASEAN Business Council. Good morning, Ambassador Brian. And
Good morning. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
morning. And we also joined by Dr. Nobuhiro Aizawa, professor at National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies, or GRIPS. Good morning, Dr. Aizawa.
Good morning, Lutfi.
Welcome. And we also joined by Dr. Adrian Ang Eugene, who is a research fellow and coordinator of United States program, IDSS, at the S. Rajaratnam Rajaratnam School of International Studies, or RISIS. Good morning, Dr. Adrian. Welcome.
Good morning, Lutfi.
Morning. And we should also joined by one more speakers, with Dr. Susi Sudarman, we all know her, senior lecturer at International Relations Department at Faculty of Social and Political Science at the University of Indonesia. We are still waiting for her to join the discussion. However, now I'm going to, before we begin the discussion, I would like to kindly give the rules and to remind all the participants that we respectfully ask participants to keep their microphones muted while the speakers and the panelists are speaking. And you are welcome to raise the questions. Please turn on your video and raise your hand, and our team will look and will hold your video to the platform so that we can allow you to ask directly to the panelists. And now, without any further ado, let us hear from our panelists on today's topic. When Trump last won in 2016, Asia Pacific saw several shocks and surprises over the next 4 years. During his first term, he engaged with North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un and ramped up military action to counter China in South China Sea. But Trump also showed a lack of interest in Southeast Asia. It is also important to note that Trump launched a tit-for-tat trade dispute with China and pulled the US from key regional agreements such as the Trans-Pacific Partnership and also the global agreements such as Paris Climate Agreement. But amidst these shocks, Trump also adopted the Indo-Pacific strategy, which initially promoted by Japan. Now, the question is, maybe to all of the panelists, to Dr. Aizawa and Dr. Adrian and Ambassador Brian, what would the difference between the Trump 1.0 to the Trump 2.0 in the US Asia policy? Like, is there any difference in the alliance arrangement policy, for example, for the Asia Pacific and ASEAN specifically? I would like to give the microphone to Dr. Aizawa first to maybe respond to this.
Thank you very much, Lutfi. That's a very difficult question, but I just have to remind you that the Trump administration haven't started, you know, so we still don't know what exactly will happen. The only clue we have is, you know, several of his campaign policies and also some, you know, unconfirmed, you know, cabinet positions. But just to give you my take on based on what so far has been shown, I think all the economic policy, I think that is pretty much the same with the first administration, because of, if you look at the members who are appointed to new cabinet positions, it's more or less there are a lot of common position. But I will say there might be two very distinct differences. One is on the security side. It's not that the US has changed or Japan has changed, but the world has changed. Especially, I think the factor of Ukraine war has made a very different setting around the global security issues. Of course, the President Trump first term was very much keen on North Korean deals and also a lot of deterrence minded security policies. But we already know that economic means of deterrence may not be effective in if you look on how the Russian invasion to Ukraine has happened. So I think that lesson will be a major factor that will change the first term and the second term, especially in the way Japan and the United States talk about the security. Because if you look at the implications what the Ukraine war has given to Asia, always the security testing will be on the gray zones and all the little things, rather than major like missiles and nuclears. So how much engagement will the alliance going to respond to small things that happens in the region? That really, that signaling have to be made in such a careful way, in a detailed way. And whether Japan and United States, maybe beyond what has established, could be responsive to that or be very strategic to do that. And also to act not only between the US and Japan, but also together with our friends in Southeast Asia and other partners in the region will be very, very important. And that network and communication has to be enhanced so much more than the first term. I think that will be a one change. On the economic side, on trade and investment, I think there is a lot of commonality. But one factor that I still don't know, maybe I need to ask our friends from the US, is the cryptocurrency, because the cryptocurrency has been one of a major topic on the new presidential agenda. And the alliance manager between the US and Japan, especially on the macro finance side, has been very strong. But to what extent will the cryptocurrency talk will shape the alliance will be a very new dynamic factor, because it goes beyond traditional relationship between the United States and Japan. Let me stop here for my first remark here.
Thank you, Dr. Aizawa. I would like to give the microphone to Ambassador Brian.
Well, thank you very much, Lutfi and Dino Jalal. Congratulations to FCPI on 10 years. I've been part of some of your programs before, and you really have a large impact in this region and beyond this region, and also for the partnership with GRIPS, very significant. Can I just maybe start by making clear that I have ambassador retired in my title, but I'm a private U.S. citizen, and I'm going to express some private opinions. And I'm also not speaking for the 180 members of the U.S. ASEAN Business Council. So just to make sure, in case I say something that sounds a bit provocative, I want to spend a minute, in a sense, not answering your question directly, Lutfi, because I feel like maybe I'm one of the people on the call who can talk about the significance of the election from the U.S. point of view, which is not the main topic of your seminar. But I just want to make the point that in the United States, we're a country that maybe is not as internationally oriented as many of the countries in Southeast Asia and even in Northeast Asia. I would say, roughly the United States is maybe 70-30 or even 80-20 domestic versus international in terms of what people care about, what people focus on. And I think that's relevant to the second election of President Trump, because there's a high amount of at the very least, drama or maybe even peril domestically in the United States, in the sense that, as previous speakers have said, the administration hasn't started yet, but the rhetoric and the kind of the claims and counterclaims are already dominating U.S. media. Who's going to retaliate against who? is a former general or general is going to be brought up on trial, pulled out of retirement, and that I think there's a lot of dramatic statements being made in the United States about the consequences of Trump domestically. Will he go after Biden appointees? And that I think my personal sense is a lot of that won't happen, but it's very distracting and very disturbing. My sense is that just a second comment on domestic significance. I think, along with Dino Jalal, I was surprised by the result. I thought the results were heading in the direction of a Kamala Harris victory. That was not the case. It was a decisive Trump victory. I'm not disputing that. What I see is that President Trump was able to harness the discontent, broad sweeping discontent in the United States, which is not only economic dissatisfaction about inflation, limited career mobility for young people, people that feel like they can't afford a home and never will. There's that stress. There's also cultural stress, people feeling left out, people feeling put down if they don't have a college education. These are very serious issues. So President Trump was very effectively able to harness that. But I guess what I would say is, will he be able to address it? In other words, he tapped into the dissatisfaction. Can he address the dissatisfaction? I think it's a big question mark. You see him, you see the early plans are for, tax cuts for billionaires, which was Trump 1.0. If you boil it down, that was the main achievement. So I think there's going to be a lot of stress and drama, and probably maybe even 2 years from now there might be a reversal where the Democrats come back strong and win the House. Okay, so that's just a domestic snapshot. I wanted to put that out there to say that, in contrast, I think that internationally it's not quite as dramatic and not quite as changed. I think there will be a lot of what there was in Trump 1.0, and in my, I happened to be in Jakarta as Sharjah in 2016 when President Trump surprisingly won. So we've been through this before. And, at the time I had to go in front of the press on day one, really unprepared. And I said, we can expect foreign policy not to change all that much because the United States has abiding interests in Asia, both economic and defense, economic and military, and those will probably stay the same. I think that's still the case. There's one of the very few areas of bipartisan agreement that's left in the United States is about the fact that China is a rival. Some people think it's more than a rival. Some people think it's an outright enemy, but many people don't quite go that far. But I think there'll be economic pressure against China, some of it rhetorical, some of it real. If you remember Trump 1.0, the United States under President Trump put in place strong tariffs. China more than retaliated. So we could get into that. We could get into that kind of spiral, and that has, I think, implications for Southeast Asia. But again, it's too soon, to really tell what's rhetoric and what's real. Last point I would make is I think there's going to be a strong push in Trump 2.0. I guess what might not be apparent to an international audience is the bitterness, the fact that Trump supporters really do sincerely feel like they were robbed of the 2020 election. They've just kind of deepened and developed that grievance over the last 4 years, and now they're back. I think there's going to be a strong push to erase everything that President Biden did, and that might have relevance for this part of the world in the sense of AUKUS. Right, AUKUS was a kind of a creative plan that the Biden administration came up with. I wouldn't be surprised if, just because of that fact that it was created under President Biden, that the United States might walk away from that. And that's a long-term agreement that, hasn't really completely had its implications yet. But if the United States does walk away from that, I think it'll send a signal that, well, you really can't count on what the United States does because it shifts policies. So I appreciate all the comments that have been made, and I'll stop there and maybe come in later in the discussion. But thank you very much, Lutfi.
Thank you, Ambassador Brian, and we'll go through that later on as well in regards of I'm really interested with the tariff and stuffs, and I will go there later on, and I will give the microphone for Dr. Adrian if he wants to respond. Dr. Adrian, we want to respond whether the Trump 1.0 and the Trump 2.0 will be different when it comes to the U.S. Asia-Pacific policy?
Thanks, Luffy. Good morning, everybody, and thanks to uh, FPCI and GRIPS for inviting me. So I would actually like to follow up on what Ambassador Bryant has said. In terms of US policy towards Asia Pacific, if we compare Trump 1.0 and the Biden administration, I don't think that we should exaggerate too much of the differences between that, because I think there was a great deal of continuity between Trump 1.0 and the Biden administration, as Ambassador Bryan has pointed out. Given the bipartisan consensus on the China challenge, and he is correct, right? There are some differences between the parties as to the exact nature of the China challenge, whether it is strategic competitor or more. But again, if we look, the Biden administration's Indo-Pacific strategy had a great deal of continuity with the Trump administration's free and open Indo-Pacific. So I think when we look forward to Trump 2.0, I think we will have the administration's official Indo-Pacific strategy and China strategy, but with a Trump administration, and I think if we look at his current nominees, President Trump will still be the final voice in all these matters. So we will have the official US policy and how Trump chooses to execute these policies. This, I think, is where the uncertainty, especially in the region, lies for the region. For the region, I think ASEAN will come under more pressure. It will have to really make the case for its value proposition, What does ASEAN offer the United States in terms of sort of concrete goals as opposed to processes? So here, I think ASEAN is also not without its own agency. So rather than sort of going with the to and fro's of different policies, what ASEAN needs to do is to build its own resilience, restore its unity, work on dealing with issues that are within the region, to deal with Myanmar, to deal with the South China Sea. And I think Ambassador Watanabe mentioned the AOIP, So the AOIP was designed to help ASEAN deal with great power competition. But if we look at AOIP, a lot of it is aspirational. So what can ASEAN and ASEAN member states do in terms of giving it substance, to make it concrete, to make it less aspirational, so to speak? And I think if we look forward to Trump 2.0 and the threat of possible tariffs, 10 to 20% tariffs, the region, I think, is also better prepared for Trump 2.0 than it was in 2016. Again, Ambassador Watanabe spoke of this web of cooperation, Sort of what I think the countries of the region have done since 2016 is build our own lattice works, to use the Biden administration's phrase of economic cooperation. So, the countries of the TPP went ahead with TPP and it became the CPTPP, and the region has also negotiated offset. So there is, I think, much greater, economic resilience for the next 4 years to whether whatever economic policy will come out from Trump 2.0. So I think I'll leave it there, and then we can continue with the conversation.
Thank you, Dr. Adrian. And I would like to welcome Mbak Suzy here to the discussion. Welcome, Mbak Suzy, but we'll try to keep the discussion going right now. And I would like to give, hello, Mbak Suzy, good morning.
Hello, thank you. I almost forgot. I thought it was this evening. I didn't realize it was this morning.
No problem, Mbak Suzy, and we will continue the discussion for now. And I would like to get back to the tariff issues. And Donald Trump has referred himself as a tariff man. And Ambassador Brian, how likely and to what extent do you think that Donald Trump will impose his across the board trade tariffs? She have mentioned he has mentioned China as China, Canada, Mexico, and he has mentioned also on the BRICS member on having new currency and impose the trade tariffs. But what do you think? How to what extent it will be imposed once he's on the office?
Well, that's a critical question. I think it would be very difficult to make an exact prediction, but maybe kind of a comment around how this might play out. So I would go back to the point of rhetoric versus actions. The rhetoric has already started, from announcing that he will put massive tariffs on day one on not only China but other countries. So the rhetoric is underway, and you've already seen announcement of plans to put huge tariffs on Canada, and then a meeting with the Prime Minister of Canada, and maybe so it's like I think you're going to see a lot of that kind of maybe whiplash or roller coaster, like, oh, dramatic tariff plan on Canada. Oh, now we're best friends. So that I just think that's par for the course for the way the president acts. As Dr. Adrian, as Professor Adrian said, you're going to have policies coming from the Commerce Department and others, but you're going to have President Trump possibly saying things that counter that, or doing things that counter that. So my first point is get ready for incoherence and confusion, and I think that'll be something that Americans and the international partners feel the same. But the second point I would make, I think there's likely to be continuity of tariffs against China. I think the thing that those of us working in ASEAN, working and living in ASEAN, need to be concerned about is I think in the Trump worldview, you can expect continuity with Trump one, in the sense of countries with trade surpluses with the United States need to be on notice. Vietnam, Indonesia, other ASEAN countries have large trade surpluses with the United States. There's many economic arguments for why that's not bad and that's natural and all that. But in the Trump 1.0 world, that was, that put you in the crosshairs. And I think ASEAN countries need to be aware of that, maybe even to the extent of thinking of like, how can ASEAN countries kind of adjust their trade patterns to show the intent, either the intent or action of importing more from the United States, to show that they're trying to get into balance. I'm a little bit afraid. Again, I'm making these comments as a private citizen, but I'm a little bit afraid that might be about the only attention that Southeast Asia gets. Is it's a bunch of countries with trade surpluses. Let's do something to them. So I feel like you have to watch out for very simplistic and shoot from the hip policies from Trump 2.0, because that's what we saw in Trump 1.0.
Thank you, Ambassador Brian. I would like to follow up actually. With we saw like Trump during the Trump 1.0, there are protectionist tendencies, which which impact pretty much a lot of Asia Pacific and ASEAN when it comes to trade as the U.S. trading partners. Will the Trump 2.0 actually, with these tendencies through in the Trump 1.0, will Asia Pacific countries, ASEAN as well, being the net losers of the international trade, or will it be the change and opportunities for the Asia Pacific country to diversify their their trade in the regions? I mean, we haven't had any idea on how would it be in Trump 2.0, but based on the Trump 1.0, how would it be? How how would it be for this Asia Pacific countries when it comes to trade with Asia with US?
Well, I don't have a monopoly on knowledge on this, but maybe three quick comments. One is there's reasons to think that Southeast Asia can benefit, and that is in the sense that to the extent there's increased pressure on U.S. firms operating in China, they're already you already see them doing a China plus one strategy, and many of them ending up in Southeast Asia. So you have this reordering of where products are made and where they're exported from. And I'm told that even Chinese firms themselves, Chinese manufacturers are doing sort of the same thing. Like they themselves are doing a China plus one strategy that puts them into Southeast Asia. So you could see increased investment and activity in Southeast Asia that raises standards. But another thing is that I represent a group of 180 U.S. businesses, and I'm not trying to I'm not trying to predict what they're going to do, but the sense within my organization of 180 companies is continuity. They have whatever plans they have in Indonesia and the other countries, they want to continue that. I don't hear them saying, well, we're going to wait for Trump 2.0 strategy on this and that. They're going to continue to the extent there's economic benefit. Certainly in the digital area and the health area, logistics area, there's a lot going on, and a lot will continue. That was the subject of the business delegation that I was part of all this week. So I think you can see a scenario where Southeast Asia would maybe even come out better, if business continues and some of the current manufacturing that's in China ends up down here.
Thank you, Ambassador Brian. Dr. Aizawa, do you have comments on my last question to Ambassador Brian?
Yes, I will definitely echo what Ambassador Brian has mentioned. I think if you just look at the net trade impact, maybe you might shape it as a losers, as you framed it. But the relocation from, say, the China plus one, as Ambassador Brian said, you can see an opportunity there, definitely, and that is up to the kind of structural reform of the countries in the region, because you are seeing there is an opportunity for after the reform. So because of the unintended, maybe the consequences of the new Trump tariff policies. The other side is, to make sure that this is not all a bad news is, you don't look at only trade per se, but from a Japanese point of view, when Japan deal with the Trump 1.0, there was a lot of emphasis on investment side rather than the trade side. And of course, Japan is a big investor in the United States. So, it really depends also on the U.S. domestic economy too. If there's the economic growth within the domestic market, there are many, economic opportunities in the United States, which creates a strong confidence, right? That's how, the first, during the first Trump administration, Japan had dealt with. The other one is, of course, Japan has dealt with like imports on, like, say, energy issues, like from Alaska, LNG Alaska was a big thing. So a lot of energy side of policies will going to change, with all the, the exit from the Paris agreements and so forth will change the narratives and change the kind of logic of the energy side, which is not too much of a bad news for emerging economies in Asia. So there are, yes, unpredictabilities, but the only way we can see is where the opportunity is and grasp those opportunities. And as you pointed out, diversification is definitely a necessity. So a lot of homework, but I would see there's a lot of opportunities that this could become a new a jumpstart of a new pattern of economy in the region.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Aizawa, for the insights. Now I would like to greet Mbak Suzy. Hello, Mbak Suzy. Mbak Suzy, I actually curious. We know that during the Trump 1.0, Trump showed lack of interest with Southeast Asia, and now with he's coming back to the office, how can we ensure ASEAN process remains central and still have the implication to the region? Dr. Adrian have mentioned earlier that let's not make it only aspirational. How can we actually play with what ASEAN has aspired? But what what do you think? What do you think about this, Mbak Suzy? Mbak Suzy, I think you have to unmute first.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm looking at geostrategy, geopolitics, and geoeconomics. And then the birth of what is known now in the US as full spectrum dominance. And I've read several books and an article that says the deep state has now co-opted Donald Trump, not seeing that Kamala Harris would be enough to do their strategy. So I'm not looking at the deep change that will happen because geopolitics dictates something that will not be avoided by Donald Trump, because I'm sure he's not going to be judged as a failing president at this geopolitical crisis that's happening throughout the world. So I would say what we learn from history, old does not mean obsolete. There are useful parts of history that can be used for future journey. In terms of the new ideas that evolve, the full spectrum dominance, even some thinkers and then some books are mentioning that the Cold War liberalism that used to be assumed as dead is actually still ongoing. And some thinkers are saying that now there's a new Cold War liberalism in terms of what how America sees China. And so we definitely would see a different Trump from Trump 1.0 because of the geopolitical situation. Maybe the one who will suffer is Ukraine, but the rest of the world are still the same in terms of, I don't think Donald Trump will be happy to be called as a failing president of Make America Great Again. So this time, he learned from his past failings that he'll do better and at least not jeopardize the usefulness of thinking rationally, And so I would say, let's just give it a try and say, maybe there's not much change. America will do, it's introducing new chapter, but what it will do abroad will be the same. Pursuing the goal that is not charity, ensuring that commitment to democracy and open markets triumphs on a global scale, even though he says deglobalized, but how can he afford to be deglobalizing when you need to trade? Necessary to sustain and strengthen the basis of American power, that's through trade. Secondly, US policy should seek to extend and adapt proven international institutions and arrangement. He's not gonna jeopardize that. Third, US policy should enforce compliance with existing international agreements and strengthen the ability of institutions to monitor and compel compliance. Maybe a little hardship for Quad, for instance, because MAGA would dictate certain things that Quad didn't think it's going to happen. Or AUKUS, for instance, maybe there's some slight changes, but I'm of the belief of the article that says the deep state has co-opted Donald Trump. So the policy would stay the same. Also, there are maybe a little wrinkles that should be ironed out, but Trump being Trump, he's going to do Cold War liberalism against China. That's what I assume. If it means seeing Indonesia as an enemy because we signed on the 9 dash lines thing recently, or maybe we are smart enough to change that in terms of it was just a joint statement, not an acknowledgement of 9 dash lines. We still have to wait until what Kemenlu does on this matter. But I think the geopolitical situation dictates something totally different from Trump 1.0.
Okay. Thank you, Mbak Suzy. That's like you have mentioned Quad and AUKUS. Will Trump 2.0 approach towards ASEAN? Will the US bypass ASEAN processes and maximize more of unilateral groupings, like such as Quad and AUKUS that you have mentioned earlier, to pursue its interest in the region? Do you think it would happen at some point?
If ASEAN can get its act together for the US, for the importance of its geopolitical and geostrategic decision is which area, which kawasan, which region can deliver for the US interest. For superpower, it's not that they have to adjust to ASEAN, but ASEAN has to shape itself and keep its house in order. First of all, ASEAN has been debunked by all this intrusion by China, for instance. You can see Myanmar, you can see Laos, you can see Vietnam, other area like Cambodia, and also Myanmar, limited intrusion of the Russians. If we cannot get our act together, and now we see Malaysia trying to get loans from China, and suddenly Indonesia debunk the 9 dash line and say we want to work together on the area that's overlapping. We still have to see what is the outcome of that. Of course, if we are continuing to be not giving strategic prizes to the US, all they can do is just balancing in terms of Garuda Shield, Super Garuda Shield, or RIMPAC, or whatever, but not a special friend like Vietnam, for instance, because Vietnam is deliberately anti-China. And you can see where ASEAN is leading. If it's not leading in the right way, of course, we don't get any gifts from Donald Trump.
Okay, thank you, Mbak Suzy. And I would like to give a common question for all of the panelists, and I'm expecting a concise answer for this. Do you think that Donald Trump's skepticism toward multilateral efforts, namely his skepticism towards NATO and backing out of the Paris Agreement, will have an impact to the US approach to the Asia Pacific on overall dimension? I will give the floor to Dr. Adrian to maybe answer this in concise way. Dr. Adrian?
Thanks, Luffy. The short answer is, of course, yes, right? But, yes with qualifications, because I think, if Trump 2.0 is going to pursue a hardline approach to China, it is going to find out very quickly that it is not going to be able to do so alone, and that it is going to need sort of allies and partners to be able to do so. So that I think will also sort of temper, hopefully, sort of a Trump 2.0 approach that is either both too unilateral or too bilateral. But again, sort of in response to this, as I mentioned earlier, and other speakers have said, sort of the countries in the region are also sort of building up their own multilateral efforts, sort of their own webs of cooperation, or whatever metaphor you choose to use, to help build up resilience in the region to deal with Trump 2.0.
Dr. Adrian, I just want to ask your insight on my question to Mbak Suzy earlier, whether U.S. can bypass ASEAN processes and maximize unilateral groupings such as Quad and AUKUS in the Trump 2.0. What do you think about that?
So, as Ambassador Bryant mentioned earlier, there is, the very real possibility that, he will junk AUKUS just simply because, AUKUS was the creation of the Biden administration. But I think, if we look more closely at AUKUS, there are serious problems with Pillar 1, which is the SSN pillar, the nuclear powered submarine pillar. So, AUKUS is problematic. And, if we look at the events just of, so the last few days in Korea, there are also, I think, going to be problems with the US, Japan, ROK trilateral moving forward just due to domestic developments in Seoul. And, sort of the so-called squad, I think it will very much depend on what is the Trump administration's attitude towards the Philippines' position in the South China Sea. So the Biden administration has very clearly stated that it stands behind Manila on Second Thomas Shoal, and it would activate Article 5 of the Mutual Defense Treaty. It will certainly depend on sort of what position the Trump administration takes moving forward. So I don't think there is we can automatically assume that Trump 2.0 will move in a unilateral direction. At the same time, there is, again, so no automatic assumption that it will bypass ASEAN processes, especially things like ARF and the EAS, which is a sort of region-wide forum. So it really is about sort of how ASEAN can leverage this convening power, to show not just the United States, but really the world that it can be more than just processes, that there are substantive goals that it can achieve, and these goals should not really be in the furtherance of either the United States or China, but these goals should really be for the furtherance of the interests of ASEAN, ASEAN member states, and the people of the region.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Adrian. Ambassador Bryant, do you think that Trump's skepticism toward multilateral efforts will have impact on the U.S. approaches on the Asia Pacific overall?
I think there will be stress again in terms of rhetoric, both in Europe, probably Latin America, major areas of the world, including ASEAN, because you will have both kind of abrupt and perhaps inconsistent statements from President Trump. Again, if we're taking his track record, if we're expecting to continue, so he might say one thing one day about ASEAN and he might say very little about ASEAN, and then he might come out and say, like, any country that has a trade deficit, watch out, or trade surplus with the U.S., watch out. So it'll be disruptive in terms of rhetoric, I think, primarily. But there are possible serious consequences for NATO in particular. There were threats against pulling out of NATO during Trump 1.0. I don't know if that will continue, but that has implications for how Ukraine plays out. I just want to maybe just come back to a comment that Professor Sudirman made. I agree with you, but maybe coming from a different direction. I mean, when I was at the beginning of the Trump administration, after I left Indonesia, I was back in a senior position in the State Department. I was acting assistant secretary. And, I used to meet my colleagues that I'd known for 20, 30 years, and we would sort of joke with each other, like, are you part of the deep state? I'm not sure if I'm part of the deep state, right? So the deep state is kind of it's a mythic thing, and I don't know if it exists or not. But I do agree with you in another sense that during Trump's first administration, he managed to play this role. Somehow he managed to pull it off during the whole 4 years, which is, I'm not a creature of Washington. I'm not a creature of government. I'm against all this, deep state, Washington swamp. I don't think he can do that in Trump 2.0. It's like he is the establishment. And by the way, he has all three branches of government. So I think it's going to be a different dynamic where, you are owning and operating the U.S. government. You are responsible for delivering results, full stop. So I don't think he can play that game as effectively as the first time.
Thank you, Ambassador Brian. To use the time effectively, I would love to give the floor to Dr. Aizawa. Take into account that he has to leave earlier from the panel as well. Dr. Aizawa, do you have any say on the Trump skepticism towards the multilateral efforts? And please, if you have the closing statement as well with you.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm not that aware of whether he will be that skeptical or not, but I think whether the multilateralism in our region is relevant or not only depends on vis-a-vis the United States, but maybe more so among others. I mean, that is exactly the way, like, say, former Prime Minister Abe did after the TPP, right? Like, after TPP was canceled, TPP 11 was there, not just because, vis-a-vis the United States, because we genuinely needed it, right? So I think that our internal, demand of bringing, more economic integration in itself is what we have to look again onto ourselves. So, for example, it is much more of our need, and also to tell that Asia is not just about China or India, but there are rest of our countries that are also economically significant. But how do we collectively say what's in there? We if we do an asymmetrical, trade position, it will not, get what we want. But if there's a very strong or clear, I think it's a clear rationale behind why we need to convene. And that's in a way a blessing from an American policy narrative. I don't know whether policy is there, but the narrative is there, and that gives a political rationale among the neighboring countries in, say, Southeast Asia. Like, let's sit back and then not pursue a very nationalistic economic policy and compete among Southeast Asia. But it's probably a good time that an economic slowdown is coming. We kind of get together to scale ourselves, because if we don't scale, the private investment is unlikely to come, and India is going to be the next big one rather than Southeast Asia. So it's not like the Trump 2.0 passes ASEAN, but the market might pass ASEAN to India. Maybe that is a bigger impact for Southeast Asia. So that's the first point I would say. And the second point is also, it gives a good homework for us to make strategical relevance on us. We shouldn't forget that even for the Trump 1.0 to deal with North Korea, Vietnam and Singapore has played a very important role in having a platform of dialogue in the region with North Korea as well. So it is a good time to look into ourselves, the geopolitical asset that we have collectively, and let's not just carry on by all the trade narratives, but and not just how to challenge vis-a-vis China, but there are many geopolitical issues that Southeast Asia has a leverage and has a position that could help any of the U.S. geopolitical policies, which was being proven by Vietnam and Singapore in the first Trump administration. So it is a good time from now before, we still have a month or so before the Trump administration. It's a good time to reflect on, the things that we tend to overlook on ourselves. So I think it's a good time to reflect on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Aizawa. Thank you so much for the insights. And I would like to invite the audiences, the participants, to ask the questions by turning on your video and raise your hand, and our friend will help to spotlight, and you can ask your question directly to the panelists. Yeah, we have Tufail Hafiz Albana. Yeah, raising his hands. Tufail, your name, your affiliation, and your which panels do you want your question to be answered by, please? You have to unmute first.
Okay, thank you. My name is Topel Hafiz Albana. I'm currently a teacher in Insan Mandiri Junior High School. So I want to ask to maybe Miss Prof. Susi, or maybe the other panelists who want to answer my question. So the question is, since US have more domestic approach to their international relations, so how less US presence in South China Sea will affect the region? So are there any indication that China will claim more in South China Sea? Thank you.
Thank you, Tufail. I would like to invite others to ask directly to the panelists, or else if we don't have anyone right now, I would like to read the questions asked through the comment section. The first question is, with growing tension in the US-China rivalry, how do you foresee Southeast Asia and the Asia-Pacific region balancing its relationship with these two superpowers under Trump 2.0 administration? And the second, okay, Yasmin here is asking to ask the question directly. Yasmin, you can turn on your video if you can and ask the questions directly and to whom your question is addressed. You can unmute your audio first, maybe.
Good morning. My name is Yasmin.
I'm sorry, your audio is not audible, Yasmin.
Okay.
We cannot hear you.
Okay, good morning.
I'm sorry, it's not still inaudible.
Yes.
Okay.
Here?
Now we can hear you now.
Okay. Yeah. Good morning. My name is Yasmin. I'm intern writer at sayasia.co, a writing platform that offers that broadcasts all news articles related to Southeast Asia from positive perspectives. Anyone can answer this? I need more explanation about how Southeast Asia can benefit from Trump's trade policy and how it is compared to Trump's previous period. And the second question is whether how important is Southeast Asia to Trump administration, and how is it? And again, how is it compared to the first administration? Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Yasmin. I would like to invite Mbak Suzy to answer Tufail's question, U.S. has more domestic approach, and how does the U.S. stands over South China Sea, and whether China could actually claim more on the South China Sea, as asked by Tufail. And I think it's also related to Mila's question, whether how Southeast Asia and the Asia Pacific region balance their relationship with U.S. and China under Trump 2.0. Mbak Susi, please.
Okay, let me just go back to Biden's administration. Since Biden, I think all foreign policy of the US has been domestically linked, because Biden think that the foreign policy of the US have left behind the middle class of the United States. So he's trying to fix that. So if Donald Trump continues this domestic elements, it has been there already since Joe Biden. So I don't think anyone who rules the United States can afford to say, okay, I will forget domestic elements and I will do foreign policy as I please, okay? Because it's not going to happen. First of all, globalization have immiserated the middle class in the US. So what any president would do is to boost up the middle class in America. And why Kamala Harris kind of like losing out? Because they didn't believe that a woman can do economic strategy that will benefit them, you know, in a sense. So a male president is more promising to them. So this domestic element has always been there, but it's even more there since Joe Biden. So Trump is not going to be any different from any one of that. It's just that he's old and he doesn't know Southeast Asia. Maybe he will focus on North Korea and he will focus on NATO. But Southeast Asia, we're lucky if we get any registry in his brain, meaning we have to prove that we are useful and we are making America profitable. But if you look at Indonesia, okay, let's just be honest about Indonesia. Can Indonesia promise anything to America? I don't think so. Even Indonesia cannot promise anything to me. I'm one of the citizens, but I cannot hope that my government will defend me or will make sure that I am employed like my students. They're the best brains in Indonesia from UI, but they have no jobs or jobs that are really meaningful to them. So I would say any of these domestic elements in America is becoming more true since Joe Biden, but then Donald Trump just continues that because not only he has to deal with geopolitical elements, he has to deal with American middle class. But in Indonesia, if we don't fix our house, if we don't make our house a little better for its citizens, I don't think anyone will invest, because only China that has ambition to rule South China Seas and make sure that the shoals, making it possible for them to create an archipelagic shoals, you know, from the base in Hainan, for instance. So the US doesn't have the stake, doesn't have the claim that China has the claim. But the US, to make the US interested in Southeast Asia, we need to fix our house. We need to have domestic schemes that don't have mafias. Our lives are intruded by mafias that are allowed by President Jokowi, and I hope it's going to be stopped by Prabowo, because these have made the middle class of Indonesia more poor. And then if they are more poor, narcotics economy will rise up, mafia economy will rise up, no more investment. You think by going abroad, advertising Indonesia, people will invest? I think Indonesia should focus on domestic elements, not we looking at American domestic elements, because American domestic elements has something to do with, is it economically wise to deal with us? It's just like that professor from Singapore said, ASEAN has to deal with India because India is more attractive because it has brain power. Now our brain power are being sucked out and we are brain drained because nobody likes to live in Indonesia anymore, the young ones, okay? This is reality that I face every day at the university. So that's my answer to fail. Don't look at the US, but look at us. Because the US has been looking at domestic elements since Joe Biden. So there's nothing new under the sun. What is needed to be renewed is our focus on our domestic policies because it's a mess.
Okay.
It's a mess.
Thank you, Mbak Suzy. I would like to give to Dr. Adrian to answer Mila's question in regards to how do you see Southeast Asia and Asia Pacific balancing their relationship with US and China under the Trump 2.0 administration, Dr. Adrian, and I will continue with Ambassador Brian as well.
Thanks for that question. So really, right, the countries of the region will try to continue not so much hedging, not so much balancing as hedging between China and the United States, right? So the long-standing policy, I mean, vocalized by the countries of the region is don't make us choose, right? We do not want to choose between the United States and China, right? The countries of the region look towards China for economic opportunities, right? China is the largest trading partner for all ASEAN member states, right? And the United States is a significant source of foreign direct investment for the region, and it also offers a security blanket for the region as an offshore balancer. So the question really is, right, how long more can the countries of the region hedge? So I think if we look at hedging as having two components, the desire for, right, Southeast Asian countries, ASEAN member states to continue hedging, I think, right, given an ideal world, all the countries will want to continue hedging, right? Because so they can continue getting benefits from both sides. So this is a situation where the countries, right, have their cake and they are also able to eat their cake. The second dimension of hedging, however, is about the external dimensions of hedging, right? Will China and United States continue to allow the countries to hedge? So again, right, we will see, what comes under Trump 2.0, whether, right, Trump 2.0 will allow the countries to continue hedging, or it is going to make countries choose. So I think, one thing moving forward that we might see under Trump 2.0 is the linkage between economics and security. So here, right, tariffs might be used as, right, a negotiation tool, right? If you want preferential treatment, if you want lower tariffs, if you want access to US markets, you are going to have to side with the US more on defense and security issues. You are going to have to join, right, the US in its, so-called coalition against China. And this is going to put, right, countries of the region in a very, very uncomfortable position. So I think, right, what we will see more and more, I think, in Trump 2.0 is the space where, right, the countries can hedge is going to shrink, that more pressure is going to be put, right, by Trump 2.0.
Thank you, Dr. Adrian. Ambassador Brian, give the floor to you.
Well, thank you very much. Lutfi, it seems like we're getting close enough to the time that maybe I can just wrap in a few comments and impressions overall, including your question. I guess since we're the the host is FCPI in Indonesia, I'm somebody who's been following Indonesia since I was first sent out here as a junior State Department officer in 1994. So that's my frame of reference is 1994 up to now. And during that time, Indonesia has a lot of problems. Every country has a lot of problems. I definitely take that point. And the businesses that were with us this week were pointing out problems as well as opportunities. But if you take the long view, I think the economy of Indonesia has is like either 7 or 8 times as big as it was in 1994, right? Real GDP. So Indonesia, despite the dip that it took in 1997, 98, has had this, very steady 5, 6, 7. Now the aim is for 8% growth. That might be difficult, but steady growth in Indonesia has happened in the past. And then just to widen it out a little bit, the economic analysts I read say that most of the world's economic growth over the next 10, 15 years is going to come from ASEAN and India. So that will, that means that, economically speaking, from a self-instituted point of view, businesses and other governments will be looking at ASEAN because that's where growth is. And then from the, I think Professor Adrian mentioned it, there is significant U.S. investment in ASEAN. I think it's something like 360 billion estimated total U.S. investment in ASEAN, which is more than the investment in Japan, Korea, and even China combined. So the ASEAN has been a site for U.S. investment for a long, long time. That's going to continue. And then, maybe even to be more like in terms of people on the call, I think we have a lot of young people, maybe students who are soon to graduate, maybe some of your students, Professor Sudirman. So, I mean, U.S. companies are looking for talented individuals in Indonesia and elsewhere in ASEAN to work. There's data centers, there's, the digital economy being built up, there's logistics, there's, there's lots of things happening. Big companies, Boeing, Google, Amazon Web Services, Pepsi, Coca-Cola, they're all talking about expanding. So I think, we can be cognizant of some changes that will happen because of Trump 2.0, but I think big picture wise, ASEAN remains a land of economic growth. I guess the last point I would make is going back to what Professor Watanabe said. The self-reliance and the stability that ASEAN provides within itself, and that Japan provides, and hopefully Korea can provide, despite the unrest that they're having right now. I think that will matter a lot. I mean, I guess there's going to be a lot of rhetoric. There's going to be a lot that President Trump says. I think we should all kind of just like take a beat. What did he say? And then maybe wait and see what happens. I think what happens is more important than what he says. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, Ambassador Brian. Mbak Susi and Dr. Adrian, we are getting close to the conclusion of the discussion. I would like to invite you to wrap up your insight on the U.S. election, how it impacts Asia Pacific.
Who starts? Me or?
Mbak Susi can start first.
Okay.
Of course.
I would do the same thing for any country. You have to show goodwill. You must engage the United States. I was in Washington for 4 months and I didn't see engagement by the Kedutaan Besar Indonesia. It seems like we are diffident, we are slow in engaging the United States, and where lobbyists of other countries resides in Washington, D.C. and try to connect with Congress, to the press, to any other institutions. And we seem to be a little slow. Maybe we are secretive. Because if the United States ever dig deeper, they know the corruption that's going on. It's not affecting me. It's not affecting my students. We're all impoverished, okay? If we have a president like Joe Biden and Donald Trump that defends the middle class, Indonesian middle class would thrive, and we are the buying power of this country. Not American middle class, but Indonesian middle class. If this is the way Indonesia deals because it wants to hide its crime, then I'm not for this country, okay? I'm definitely against any elements of secrecy that stops relationship from going to its course, which means goodwill to all countries, not only to China, because China will give you money, but do the right thing in diplomatic terms and not confuse us. Because as it is, the 9-dash line retort has befuddled the country because it affects ASEAN. ASEAN is confused about Indonesia's step. And then I hope for the future that Indonesia would be normal and can deal with countries not based on secrecy of what its wealth is being plundered by bigger countries like China. And we should make sure that all Indonesians live in a good, happy life and economic stability. That's it. That's my
Thank
brief.
you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mbak Susi. Dr. Adrian?
Thanks, Luffy. I think, what Ambassador Brian just said is very important. So, we have to wait and discern the signal from the noise, right, coming out from a Trump 2.0. And I think we should also, right, sort of not overreact to, right, rhetoric or policies coming out from Washington, D.C. over the 2.0, over the next 4 years, sorry. And that, right, sort of ASEAN member states need to take the longer view, right? And to, what, Ibu Susi has said, right? That requires, right, sort of building up the capacity of ASEAN and ASEAN member states, right, for our own interests, right, for our own benefit and the benefit of, right, its citizens, right, rather than trying to play the geopolitical game, right, that Beijing and Washington would have us do. So again, right, if we're looking at ASEAN, right, ASEAN already has a blueprint for this, right? It's the ASEAN community, right, with its three pillars: the economic pillar, right, the security pillar, and the social cultural pillar, right? So the thing for ASEAN to do is, right, to turn that vision into reality, right? So it cannot always be, right, a vision, right? So now the latest vision is right, the community 2045, right? So it cannot always be aspirational, right? So what the countries, right, of the region really have to do, right, is to concretize that vision, right, and to improve the lives, right, of its citizens, right, in the here and now, right, rather than make it aspirational. I think that really is the best way, right, for the region to deal with, right, geopolitical competition, right, to do all these things, right, for us, right, because it is in our interest, right, not necessarily, and not in the interest of, right, the so-called great powers.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Adrian. As we are concluding our discussion today, I would like to highlight once again that the US has been having robust relations with the countries in Asia Pacific and as well ASEAN. And as we are waiting for the Trump 2.0 to take over the office in Washington, D.C., we have to note that self-sustainability will be matter. And countries in Asia Pacific has to take a longer view, as mentioned by Dr. Adrian. And as I want to echo what Suzy has mentioned, ASEAN and Indonesia needs to fix its home first and do more than aspire, as Dr. Adrian have mentioned earlier. ASEAN needs to do something rather than aspire, build the capacity, benefit its own citizens, and have a better skins for themselves and to build their region themselves. Thank you so much to Ambassador Brian McPheeters, Dr. Adrian, and Mbak Suzy, and of course, Dr. Aizawa, who has left earlier, for such a really interesting discussion as we wait for the Trump 2.0 to happen. And I'll hand the floor back to Gemma, to our host, to close the discussion. Thank you so much. Glad to have you here, everyone. Gemma, I think it's still muted.
Okay, sorry. Thank you, Mr. Ramis, for moderating today's discussion, and thank you all the speakers for sharing your incredible insights. Before we wrap up the event, I would like to invite the speakers and everyone for a short photo session. So please turn on your videos and pose. And on my count, 1, 2, 3. And another one, another pose. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Thank you, everyone. It has been a fruitful discussion, and I'm sure the audience found the session interesting and highly informative. Today's event is available for a rewatch on FPCI official YouTube channel at Secretariat FPCI. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in for today's discussion. You can follow our social media handles for more information about our activities, events, and programs, and also stay tuned to our next FPCI-GRIPS virtual public forum via Instagram and X at FPC Indo. Thank you, and see you in the next FPCI event.
Thank you so much, Dr. Adrian, Mbak Susi. Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much.